Los Angeles, a city of dreams, but also a city of survival. In the early 20th century, Latino youth faced discrimination, poverty, and violence from all sides. And in the fight to protect their own, the first organized Latino street gangs were born. Before the rise of the mega gangs we know today, there were 5 original crews that shaped the landscape of LA's gang culture. They weren't just street thugs. They were neighborhood defenders, cultural warriors, and, for some, the only family they had. From the alleys of Boyle Heights to the streets of East Los, these were the first 5 organized Latino street gangs in Los Angeles: White Fence, Clanton 14, Dogtown, Happy Valley, and Maravilla. Each with their own history, their own battles, and their own legacy. How did they start? Why did they rise? And where are they now? This is the story of LA's first Latino street gangs, where history meets the streets. First up on our list, White Fence is one of the oldest and most notorious Latino street gangs in Los Angeles, with a long and complex history. White Fence was founded in the 1920s or early 1930s. Exact date is debated, but most sources place it in the late 1920s. The gang originated in Boyle Heights, specifically near Indiana Street and Folsom Street. The gang was formed by young Mexican-American men and teenagers. Specific individuals are not well documented, as it started as a loose neighborhood group. White Fence began as a social club and neighborhood protection group, initially to defend their territory from rival gangs and racial violence from white gangs, like the Los Angeles Alpine Street Gang. It was one of the first Mexican-American gangs to evolve from street fights into organized criminal activities. White Fence controlled parts of Boyle Heights and had a strong presence in several local schools, including Roosevelt High School, a major recruitment ground, Hollenbeck Middle School, Garfield High School, limited influence. Their control over schools meant they could recruit young members before they were old enough to engage in serious criminal activity. White Fence, like many early gangs, recruited neighborhood youth, often those from broken homes or seeking protection. Many joined due to social pressure, family connections, or simply growing up in the neighborhood. Initiation in the 1930s, 1940s. Jump-ins. New recruits were jumped in, beaten for a set amount of time, typically 13 seconds. Missions. Some had to commit a violent act, robbery, assault, or attacking a rival gang member to prove their loyalty. Spray painting and tagging. Some recruits had to prove their dedication by tagging gang symbols in enemy territory. In the early days, 1930s and 1950s, a White Fence gang member's routine included hanging out on the block, watching for rival gangs and police, getting into street fights, which were common before guns became widespread in gang conflicts, drinking and partying at local houses or in parks, petty crimes. Many early members engaged in theft, vandalism, and small-time drug dealing. Defending the neighborhood. If rival gangs or outsiders came into their area, members were expected to react. Over time, the gang evolved from neighborhood fights into more serious organized crime, drug trafficking, and extortion. White Fence was one of the first Mexican gangs in Los Angeles to use firearms in gang conflicts. Their criminal operations expanded over the decades. Early days, 1920s to 1940s, mostly street fights, vandalism, and robbery. 1950s, 1970s, increased involvement in drug trade, including heroin and marijuana. 1980s, present, more structured criminal operations, including methamphetamine distribution, extortion, and murder for hire. White Fence was also one of the first Latino gangs to gain connections with organized crime, including the Mexican Mafia, La M. The most common White Fence gang sign is forming a W with 3 fingers on one hand and an F with the other hand. Early graffiti was simple WF or White Fence tags, often in Old English font. Later, members added skulls, crossbones, and 13 to show allegiance to the Mexican Mafia. Most famous White Fence member, Puppet, Luis Maciel. One of the most well-known members, a major figure in gang-related crimes in the 1980s, 1990s, with strong ties to the Mexican Mafia. Other members have been tied to organized crime, including drug trafficking networks that extend into Mexico. White Fence is still active in Boyle Heights, but has expanded to East LA, the San Gabriel Valley, and parts of the San Fernando Valley. There are also White Fence affiliates in Texas and even parts of Mexico. Membership, estimated at 600 to 800 active members, but thousands of associates. Reach, primarily Southern California, but influences Arizona, Nevada, and Mexico due to cartel connections. Rivalries and alliances. Biggest rivals. El Hoyo Maravilla, one of the oldest rivalries, dating back to the 1940s. Barrio Nuevo Estrada, VNE. Ongoing tension over territory in East LA. East Coast Crips, one of the major Black Latino gang conflicts in LA. MS-13. In some areas, conflicts have occurred due to Mexican Mafia politics. How the rivalries started. Many of these rivalries started from territorial disputes and escalated into violent gang wars. Maravilla gangs refused to submit to the Mexican Mafia, causing friction with White Fence, which aligned with La M. Alliances. Mexican Mafia, La M. White Fence has been a loyal Sureño gang under the Mexican Mafia's control. Other Sureño gangs. White Fence has alliances with most Sureño gangs under La M's umbrella, including Florencia 13 and 18th Street, depending on location. White Fence is not as powerful as gangs like 18th Street or MS-13 in terms of numbers. However, they have historical influence and deep ties to La M, which keeps them relevant. They remain one of the most respected old-school gangs in LA and still control parts of Boyle Heights. White Fence is one of the most historic, violent, and influential Latino gangs in Los Angeles. They were pioneers in using guns in gang conflicts, forming alliances with La M and expanding beyond street crime into organized crime. While their power has diminished compared to larger gangs, they remain a feared and respected name in LA gang culture. Next up, we will do a deep dive on Clanton 14. Clanton 14, also known as Clanton Street or C14, was founded in 1921 in Los Angeles, California. The gang originated on Clanton Street, now 14th Place, in Boyle Heights, a historically Mexican-American neighborhood. The gang was started by Mexican-American youth, but like most early gangs, no single founder is documented. It began as a street clique for protection against racial violence from white gangs and law enforcement discrimination. Why it started. In the early 1900s, Mexican immigrants faced discrimination, racial violence, and police brutality. White gangs, like Alpine Street Gang, often targeted Latino youth. Clanton 14 formed as a brotherhood for protection, evolving into an organized gang over the decades. Territory and schools controlled primary territory, 1920s, 1960s, Clanton Street, 14th Place, and Boyle Heights, East Los Angeles. Parts of downtown LA schools, controlled, Roosevelt High School, Boyle Heights. Garfield High School, East LA. Hollenbeck Middle School, Belmont High School, downtown LA. Clanton. Schwartin recruited neighborhood youth, mainly Mexican-American boys who grew up in Boyle Heights. Many recruits were family members of older gang members. Some recruits were brought in through friendship circles and encouraged to prove their loyalty. Initiation tactics, 1920s, 1950s. Jump in, run to 14-second beatdown. Common practice to prove toughness. Criminal acts. New members were often required to rob, vandalize, or attack a rival to gain entry. Tagging missions. Some initiates had to spray gang graffiti in rival territories. In the 1920s, 1950s, a Clanton 14 member's life typically involved hanging out on the block, watching for rival gangs or police, drinking and partying, often at local parks, fighting white and rival Mexican gangs to defend their turf, stealing cars and petty theft to make money, running from police as law enforcement regularly targeted Chicano youth, tagging walls with gang graffiti to mark their presence. Over time, as Clanton 14 became more organized, members started engaging in drug trafficking, extortion, and robbery. Criminal activity, early days, 1920s to 1950s. Street fights with rival gangs, vandalism and graffiti, auto theft and burglary, 1960s, 1980s. Clanton Fort moved into drug distribution, mainly marijuana and heroin. They became involved in organized crime under the Mexican mafia, La M. Increased violent conflicts with rivals, leading to gang-related murders. 1990s, present, methamphetamine and cocaine trafficking, extortion and murder for hire under La M. Human trafficking and gun running in some areas. Gang signs. Clanton Fort Dimmy members throw up a C using their hand. Some flash C14 with their fingers, though this later became problematic due to the number 14 being associated with norteños. Graffiti style, typically Clanton or C14 in Old English letters. Clantone is sometimes used, crossed out names of rival gangs. Over time, they adopted C13 after falling under Sureño influence. Famous Clanton sort of fort members, Sleepy, real name unknown. One of the first Clanton 14 members to gain notoriety for violent crimes in the 1970s, 1980s. Big Puppet, a high-ranking member connected to the Mexican mafia, involved in organized crime. While individual members are known in gang circles, Clanton 14 has never had a widely recognized figure like some larger gangs. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Clanton 14 became a Sureño gang under the Mexican mafia, La M. They started dropping the 14 and using C13 instead, aligning themselves with La M. Is writing 14 a problem? Yes. The number 14 is associated with norteños, Northern California gangs. This led to some Clanton 14 members switching to C13 to avoid confusion. Where is Clanton 14 today? Still active in Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, downtown LA, and East LA. Clanton 14 has expanded to other states, including Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. Some Clanton members operate in Mexico, involved in drug trafficking. How many members? Estimated 500 to 1,000 active members. Larger network of associates and affiliates. How far is their reach? Primarily Southern California, but also present in Las Vegas, Phoenix, and parts of Mexico. Rivalries and alliances' biggest rivals, 18th Street Gang. One of the bloodiest rivalries, MS-13. Conflicts due to territorial disputes. White Fence. Historical rivalry dating back to the 1940s. Norteños, Northern California, due to their past use of the number 14. How the rivalries started. Many rivalries began over territory disputes in Boyle Heights and East LA. The Clanton 14 vs. 18th Street War became violent in the 1980s. Conflicts with MS-13 and White Fence stem from both gangs being early power players in LA. Alliances. Mexican Mafia, La M. Clanton Fort is now a Sureño gang under La M's control. Other Sureño gangs. They are allied with Florencia 13, Barrio Nuevo Estrada, VNE, and some factions of 38th Street Gang. Clanton Fort is not as large as 18th Street or MS-13, but they are one of the oldest and most respected Sureño gangs. Their Mexican Mafia connections give them power, despite their smaller numbers. Their history keeps them relevant, even as newer gangs have grown larger. Clanton Chart 14 is one of the oldest and most influential Latino street gangs in Los Angeles. While their original identity as C14 has faded in favor of Sureño allegiance, they remain a feared and respected gang in LA and beyond. Their history is deeply tied to the evolution of LA gang culture, and their name still carries weight in the streets today. Next up, a deep dive on Dogtown, Barrio Dogtown Rifa. Origins of Dogtown formation date. Dogtown was founded in the early 1900s, likely around the 1910s to 1920s. Neighborhood. The gang originated in Dogtown, a section of Boyle Heights near the Los Angeles River. This area, located close to the rail yards and factories, was home to working-class Mexican-American families. Founders. There is no single documented founder, but the gang formed organically among Mexican-American youth who banded together for protection. Why it started. Early Mexican immigrants faced segregation, racial violence, and police harassment. Local white gangs and law enforcement targeted Latino youth. Dogtown formed as a defensive group, eventually evolving into a full-fledged gang. Territory and schools controlled primary territory, 1920s, 1960s. Dogtown area of Boyle Heights, near the LA River and rail yards, parts of East Los Angeles and downtown LA. Schools controlled. Roosevelt High School, Boyle Heights, Hollenbeck Middle School, Garfield High School, East LA. Some influence in Belmont High School recruitment and initiation rituals. Recruitment methods. Neighborhood-based recruitment. Most members came from families already living in the area. Younger brothers and cousins of older members were often brought in. Friends from school or work were introduced into the gang gradually. Some members were drawn in through parties, fights, and social circles. Initiation tactics, 1920s, 1950s. Jump in, beat down for 13 to 14 seconds. A common test of toughness. Tagging missions. New recruits had to mark Dogtown territory, robbery or vandalism, proving loyalty through criminal acts. Fighting rivals. Initiates were sometimes ordered to attack a White Fence or Clanton 14 member. Day-to-day life of an early Dogtown member. In the 1920s and 1950s, a typical Dogtown member's routine involved hanging out in the barrio, keeping an eye out for rival gangs or police. Fighting rival gangs, particularly White Fence and Clanton 14. Drinking and partying, often at parks or near the rail yards. Auto theft and small-time robberies to make money. tagging walls to mark Dogtown territory. Working factory jobs, some early members had legal jobs but were still involved in gang activity. Criminal activity early days, 1920s to 1950s, fistfights with rival gangs, vandalism and graffiti, petty theft and auto theft, 1960s and 1980s, drug sales, primarily marijuana and heroin, robbery and extortion in local businesses, more violent clashes with White Fence, Clanton 14, and newer gangs, 1990s. Present, methamphetamine and cocaine trafficking, connections to the Mexican mafia, La M, murder, extortion, and organized crime activities. Gang signs and graffiti gang signs, hand sign forming a D for Dogtown. Some members throw up DT with their fingers. Graffiti style, Dogtown, or barrio Dogtown rifa in Old English letters. Often features a dog, a paw print, or DT. Names of fallen members and crossed-out names of rival gangs. Famous Dogtown members, no widely known public figures, but some high-ranking members are known within gang circles. Dogtown has been linked to La M, Mexican mafia, giving them power in organized crime. Adoption of the Sureño flag and number 13. When did Dogtown fall under the Sureño flag? 1970s, 1980s, as the Mexican mafia, La M, gained control over LA's Latino gangs. Dogtown adopted DT-13, showing loyalty to La M. Current status of Dogtown. Where is Dogtown today? Still active in Boyle Heights, East LA, and downtown LA. Dogtown members have been found in Arizona, Texas, and Nevada. Some members operate in Mexico, involved in drug trafficking. How many members? Estimated 400 to 800 active members. How far is their reach? Primarily Southern California, with some out-of-state members. Rivalries and alliances. Biggest rivals, White Fence. One of their oldest rivals, Clanton 14, C13. Long history of violence. 18th Street, turf battles and power struggles. Barrio Nuevo Estrada, VNE. Fought over Boyle Heights territory. How the rivalries started. Many rivalries began over territory disputes in Boyle Heights and East LA. White Fence versus Dogtown has been one of the longest-running feuds. Alliances, Mexican Mafia, La M. Dogtown is now a Sureño gang under La M's influence. Other Sureño gangs, they are allied with Florencia 13, Barrio Nuevo Estrada, and some factions of 38th Street Gang. Power and influence. Today, ranking among LA gangs, Dogtown is not as large as 18th Street or MS-13, but it remains a historic and respected gang in Boyle Heights. Their Mexican mafia ties give them influence, even though they are smaller than some other gangs. Their legacy as one of LA's first Mexican-American gangs keeps their name alive in gang culture. Dogtown is one of the oldest and most respected Latino street gangs in Los Angeles. While not as large as some modern gangs, their deep history, strong Sureño ties, and reputation for violence. Next up, a deep dive on Happy Valley. Barrio Happy Valley Rifa. Origins of Happy Valley. Happy Valley is one of Los Angeles's earliest Chicano street gangs, dating back to the 1910s or 1920s. The gang originated in Lincoln Heights, Los Angeles, specifically in the Happy Valley area, a small community within the hills of Lincoln Heights. There is no single documented founder, as the gang formed organically among local Mexican-American youth who were growing up in a racially segregated, and economically challenged environment. Why it started: self-protection from racist attacks and discrimination, defense against other gangs forming in the area, a sense of identity and belonging in a marginalized community, territory and schools, controlled primary territory, 1920s to 1960s, Happy Valley neighborhood, Lincoln Heights, LA, surrounding areas of East LA and Highland Park. Schools controlled: Lincoln High School, Lincoln Heights, Griffith Middle School, Sacred Heart School, Catholic School, some influence. Recruitment methods: neighborhood-based recruitment. Local kids joined naturally. Older siblings and family members passed down the gang lifestyle. Social recruitment: new members often joined through friends, parties, and neighborhood gatherings. Initiation tactics: 1920s to 1950s. Jumped in, beat down for a set amount of time, often 13 to 20 seconds. Commitment test: some were asked to steal, fight, or tag the gang's name. Attacking a rival gang member to prove loyalty. In the 1920s, 1950s, a typical Happy Valley member's routine included hanging out in the neighborhood, watching for rivals, drinking, partying, and socializing in Lincoln Heights, fistfighting or attacking rival gangs in the area, stealing cars or robbing businesses to make money, vandalizing walls with gang graffiti to claim turf. Some members worked regular jobs but still participated in gang activities. Criminal activity early days, 1920s to 1950s, street fights and brawls with rival gangs, vandalism and graffiti marking their territory, petty theft and burglaries, 1960s, 1980s, more organized drug trafficking, marijuana, heroin, robbery and extortion of local businesses, increased violence and homicides due to escalating gang wars, 1990s. Present: methamphetamine and cocaine distribution, deeper ties with the Mexican mafia, La M, murder, extortion, and organized criminal activity. Gang signs and graffiti. Gang signs: hand gestures forming an H for Happy Valley. Some members throw up HV or LH for Lincoln Heights. Graffiti style: Happy Valley or Barrio Happy Valley Rifa in Old English lettering, HV13 or Happy Valley 13, indicating Sureño affiliation. Symbols like a smiley face or HV with stylized lettering. Names of fallen members and crossed-out rival gang names. Famous Happy Valley members. No widely known public figures, but some high-ranking members have been connected to La M, Mexican mafia, giving the gang influence in the prison system and organized crime. Where is Happy Valley today? Still active in Lincoln Heights, but not as dominant as before. Some members relocated to areas in the San Gabriel Valley, Arizona, and Nevada. How many members? Estimated 200 to 400 active members. How far is their reach? Mostly Los Angeles-based, with some out-of-state members. Rivalries and alliances began rivals, avenues, AVN. Lincoln Heights and Highland Park, gang wars. East Lake gang, territorial disputes in Lincoln Heights. Highland Park gang, conflicts over control of Northeast LA. 18th Street gang, clashes over expansion into Lincoln Heights. How the rivalries started. Most rivalries began over territorial disputes in Lincoln Heights and Northeast LA. Some feuds intensified as newer gangs emerged and challenged Happy Valley's dominance. Alliances: Mexican Mafia, La M, Happy Valley is a Sureño gang under La M's influence. Other Sureño gangs. They have alliances with Florencia 13, Barrio Nuevo Estrada, and other Sureño-affiliated gangs. Power and influence. Today, ranking among LA gangs, Happy Valley was once a dominant force in Lincoln Heights, but over time, bigger gangs like 18th Street and MS-13 surpassed them in numbers and influence. Their Mexican mafia ties still give them power, but they are not among the top-tier gangs in Los Angeles today. Their historical legacy as one of LA's oldest Mexican-American gangs keeps their name respected in gang culture. Happy Valley is one of the oldest and most respected Latino street gangs in Los Angeles. While they may not be as large or dominant as modern mega gangs, their deep history, strong Sureño ties, and legacy in Lincoln Heights ensure that Happy Valley remains a name with weight in LA gang culture today. Last on our list, let's deep dive on Maravilla. The Maravilla gang dates back to the 1920s or 1930s and is one of the oldest Latino street gangs in Los Angeles. Maravilla originated in East Los Angeles, specifically in the Maravilla housing projects and surrounding areas. There is no single documented founder, as the gang formed naturally among Mexican-American youth living in East LA. Why it started: self-protection from racial discrimination and police brutality, territorial defense against rival gangs, a sense of identity and brotherhood in a time of segregation and economic struggle. Primary territory: Maravilla housing projects, Ramona Gardens, Lopez Maravilla, and other nearby areas surrounding parts of East Los Angeles. Schools controlled: Griffith Middle School, Garfield High School, Belvedere Middle School, Esteban Torres High School. Recruitment and initiation rituals. Recruitment methods. Local youth were brought in through family and friendships. Hanging out in Maravilla-controlled neighborhoods often led to involvement. Older gang members recruited young kids, offering them protection and status. Initiation tactics. 1930s, summer 1960s. Jumped in. Beat down by multiple members for 13 to 20 seconds. Commitment tests, including fighting rivals or stealing cars. Doing a favor, criminal act, for an older member. A typical Maravilla member's daily routine in the 1940s, 1970s included hanging out in the neighborhood, enforcing their presence. Fistfights and brawls with rival gangs in East LA. Tagging walls with Maravilla graffiti, robbing local businesses for money, engaging in street crime like car thefts and home burglaries. Some members had regular jobs but remained affiliated. Criminal activity early days, 1920s, 1950s, street fights and gang wars. Graffiti and vandalism, petty theft and burglary. 1960s, 1980s, drug trafficking, marijuana, heroin, organized robbery and extortion, drive-by shootings and targeted hits. 1990s, present, cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin distribution. More structured crime under Mexican mafia influence. Murder, extortion, and control of local drug trade. Gang signs and graffiti. Gang signs, throwing up MV with their hands. E sign for East LA. Some members throw 3 fingers for or treche, 13, though they have distance from Sureños in the past. Graffiti style, Maravilla, or MV in Old English lettering. East Side Maravilla, or specific Maravilla cliques, Lopez MV, Ford MV, etc. Crossing out enemy gang names as a sign of dominance. Famous Maravilla members, Notable figures. Many early members were rumored to have ties to the Mexican mafia, La M, though Maravilla eventually distanced itself from La M. Some Maravilla members became high-ranking criminals in California prisons. Did Maravilla start the Mexican mafia? Yes and no. Some of the original founders of the Mexican mafia in the late 1950s were Maravilla members. However, Maravilla later became one of the few gangs to defy La M, refusing to pay tribute, which led to conflict. This decision caused Maravilla to be greenlit, marked for death, by the Mexican mafia in the 1990s, making them a unique case in LA gang politics. Where is Maravilla today? Still active in East Los Angeles. Some members relocated to Las Vegas, Arizona, and Texas. They still control portions of East LA, but face pressure from other gangs. How many members? Estimated 500 to 800 active members across different Maravilla cliques. How far is their reach? Mostly Los Angeles-based, but with out-of-state members in Texas and Nevada. Rivalries and alliances, biggest rivals. Sureño-affiliated gangs, since Maravilla defied La M. Florencia 13, F13. Territorial disputes. El Hoyo Maravilla versus Lopez Maravilla, internal beef. 18th Street Gang, conflict over expansion into East LA. How the rivalries started. Maravilla's refusal to follow Mexican mafia orders made them enemies of Sureños. Old territorial disputes in East LA led to conflicts with nearby gangs. Alliances. Maravilla cliques tend to support each other, but also have internal conflicts. Independent from La M, which makes them unique in LA gang culture. Power and influence. Today ranking. Among LA gangs. Once one of the most powerful Latino gangs in LA, Maravilla lost influence after breaking from La M. Still a strong force in East LA, but not as dominant as Florencia 13, 18th Street, or MS 13. One of the only major gangs to resist Mexican mafia control, making them a rare independent force in gang politics. Maravilla is one of the oldest and most legendary gangs in Los Angeles, known for its long history, deep roots in East LA, and its defiance of La M. While they may not hold the same level of power as larger gangs today, their legacy and continued presence in East Los Angeles make them a unique and historically significant street gang. And there you have it, the first 5 organized Latino street gangs that shaped the streets of Los Angeles. These weren't just street crews. They were the foundation of a culture, a history, and a legacy that still echoes today. From the days of defending their communities to becoming some of the most feared names in gang history, these groups evolved, adapted, and, for better or worse, left their mark on the city. But the question is, how much of this history is still influencing the streets today? Are these gangs a thing of the past, or is their legacy still alive and thriving? Let me know what you think in the comments. Which of these gangs do you think had the biggest impact? And if you want more deep dives into LA's gang history, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started. Comment your thoughts below.